Hey there, I'm Jeff Elkins, and this is the Dialogue Doctor Podcast. Today on the podcast, Dialogue Doctor Coach Laura Humm sits down with author Danielle Bonneau to talk about understanding your characters at the scene level. Okay, y'all, right off the bat, I want to talk about the Dialogue Dash. It is starting September 28th. This is our 80-day unique community writing experience. There is I think, misconception amongst many writers that writing is an isolated task, that it is something we go to the cabin in the woods and lock ourselves away and do by ourselves, and then we emerge with this amazing manuscript. It's not true. Writing is a team sport. We need each other. We need each other for encouragement. We need each other for ideas. We need each other to solve problems. All the great writers had communities of people around them. I have yet to find one that wrote in isolation by themselves. So come join us. It is again 80 days. It's $1 a day. It's going to start September 28th. It goes until December 14th. During the Dash, you'll get access to the coaches and the Dialogue Doctor community. There's 2 different Dialogue Dash workbooks, one for a solo point of view work and one for a multi point of view work. It is 9 hours of 1 hour live webinars, so 9 1-hour live webinars, 30 virtual office hours with Dialogue Doctor coaches. We just get to come, hang out with the community, ask questions, bounce ideas off of them. We do contests to motivate your work, and it's a supportive community that's going to help you get your books done. So come and sign up. It's a lot of fun. Again, it's $1 a day. It's super cheap, and it's you get kind of intense access to Laura, JP, and I, and to the rest of the community. And the goal is to help you get your book done. It doesn't matter where you are in your book. You don't have to be starting a new book. You could be deep into editing your existing book. We are not going to prescribe okay, on this day you have to do this thing. Our goal is to just give you tools and a community around you along the way so you can progress your book from wherever it is. We spend the first month in October talking about the structure of your book. We help you think through a bunch of things, look at POV and your vehicle characters, and we look at your supporting cast, all that kind of stuff. And then November, we all put our heads down and we work really hard. And then in December, we have 2 weeks where we talk about editing and kind of set up okay, now that we have this manuscript, what are we doing with it? How are we making it better, stronger, all that kind of stuff. So it's a really great community experience. Again, it doesn't matter where you are in your book, if you're starting a new book or if you are working on an existing book, come and join us. It's a lot of fun. And again, you need that supportive community around you to do your thing. So you can sign up on this. You can sign up for this at dialoguedoctor.com. Go and click on the Dash 2025 button in the menu, and you can sign up there. Okay. That is the Dash. And I think that's everything going on in the community right now. So come and sign up. It's going to be awesome, and we'd love to have you with us. Okay, on a personal note, I don't really have a ton of updates. I'm still querying agents and managers for the screenplay I'm writing, or that I've written with my screenplay writing partner, Sean Paul Murphy. It's really great. We've gotten some responses back, which is always nice when people respond to query letters. It's always great. So I'm hopeful for that. And I've moved on to writing another one. Again, my goal this year was 4 screenplays in a year. I'm 30 to 40 pages into one. It's a book I wrote. And I'm really struggling because the book had 7 plot lines. And then the plot lines, as I've tried to put it into a feature screenplay, I've had to cut out plot lines, because the big difference I've learned between writing a novel and writing a screenplay is the time limitations. And I was putting it together, and I got down to I was okay, of the 7 plot lines, I only have 2 plot lines left. And I was I don't really like this story without all 7. So, I'm kind of putting that one aside, and I'm going to try to start another one until I can figure out how to better do it. But yeah, anyway, that's what I'm working on. I'm just chugging away, y'all. Writing Nerds, JP and I have a Kickstarter coming up in October for Nerds season 1 and 2, and so we're finishing up season 2, and I'm loving it. I think it's some of the best writing I've ever done. It's fun and it's a little wacky. This last week, I got to write our main characters encounter a group of bank robbing psychics who are a little zany, and so it was a good time. It was a lot of fun. I'm just having fun, y'all. Just chugging away, writing away. Getting my kids are going back to college here in a couple weeks. One kid is going to college for the first time, and another kid is going back to college. And so also just kind of trying to like suck up all the time with them I can get before they disappear for 3 months. But yeah, that's about nothing huge to report. Just, hanging out with family, watching them play. My kids like to play cards, so they were playing spades last night. They're playing rummy the night before. They just, it's nice to have kids that like each other. That's makes life way more easier. I'm not sure how I lucked out and got that, but yeah, it's great. So yeah, that's my personal update. All right, that's enough. That's enough of me. That's enough of me just rambling. Let's get into the conversation with Laura.
Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Humm. I'm one of the Dialogue Doctor coaches and editors, and I'm here today with the amazing Danielle Bonneau. Did I say it right?
Yes, you
I
did.
was practicing. Um, I practice it all the time in my head. I'm afraid I'm going to lose it. And we've done free sessions and working together sessions a couple of times. So welcome back.
Thank you. And you are quite familiar with my Philo, my main character. She's a nice uh, let's say interesting woman. She's set. She lives. Well, I guess I'll start by
Yeah.
talking about my project that I've been working on for the last 7 years. It's amazing to think that it's been that long, but it's a quest into my family history that has brought me to go and research deeper and deeper and deeper and have so much fun. I must say I'm a journalist, so research and digging to get the most accurate information is kind of a passion. So I know I have had a lot of fun, and during all those years, my philo, my character, who actually is my my grandmother's grandmother, which is her name. My grandmother's name was Alice Descaries, and if you live in Montreal, like where I am in Quebec, um, the Caddy Boulevard is very, very well known. It's one of the main autoroutes that crosses the city. So I think it's catchy to know more about who was that family that grew melons and was kind of prosperous and well known. And so they had actually commissioned a book where you had every Descaries that ever lived in Quebec, in Montreal, like that, from all their dates of their weddings, of the baptisms, and the burials of every Descaries from 1654 to 1910. So that's my let's say that a
Oh,
skeleton, of
yeah.
a storyline. So it guides a lot of the action, but of course I've also put some fiction. So yes,
Hmm.
you do know Philo,
I
and
do.
yes.
Well, and I have to say, the very first session, I wish I had looked up the number. I'll look it up and maybe Jeff will put it in the notes for us. But the very first session that we did together, your story of Philo, I'm so glad we're working together because it haunted me. Her story is like, she was such a, like, she went through so much. And that first scene that you shared with me, where she's trying to help her best friend, and then her daughter gets sick and eventually passes away. And it's like her story is so heart-wrenching. I just like, I couldn't wait to read it when it was right. So like I'm always excited when you send me a new chapter because I get like the next installment. So Yeah,
But
it's great.
the thing is that having all those dates, that's how I discovered that, my God, she lost, she lost her 6-year-old daughter when she was 8 months pregnant. And so that's how I figured that that was a great time to start the
Yeah.
story. And then her best friend, her sister-in-law, happened to we said I have all those dates, and I went to the church of Notre Dame de Grâce. I went to the church, and I saw that her sister-in-law was buried in the crypt, and she died like 3 months after all, like the death of her daughter and the birth of who happens to be my great great grandfather. So, and then that woman, she
Mhm.
had lost like six babies, all one in a row, and then that got me to really understand firsthand how much of a tragedy it was to lose all those babies. And there was a appalling death rate for children. Before like 1 year old, like in the story is set uh, at the end of the like the 1800s and early 1900s. So this is part of the underlying storyline
Mhm.
that will bring Philo to want uh, to fight, to change, to bring change, and that's going to bring her to be with this first wave of feminism. So it's really
Yeah.
it's become a very fun project.
Yeah. It's very, very compelling. And to know that it's based on truth makes it that much more compelling. And you have photographs and such that you plan to put in and publish with the story, which I always think is amazing.
No, exactly, exactly. And
So,
the thing that you were gonna look, the thing is that I've there wasn't much that I knew about my grandmother's grandparents. And what one thing that my grandmother had told me is that her parents were like Romeo and Juliet, and both their families were fighting and did not want them to get married. So the scene we're going to be looking at now is the reconciliation, because of
mhm.
course they got married. So,
Yep.
so,
And all those years
so
later, here you are writing a story about them.
but I have to discover why were those two families feuding, the
Yep.
Descartes and the Lafleur. And that's why if you've known them being best friends,
Hmm.
then there was a rift that happened. And now the scenes we're going to be looking at is a reconciliation, but it is not easy for Philo, because Philo feels that she was betrayed. So there's many chapters where she refuses to see uh,
Hmm.
Madame Lafleur, because she feels that she was wronged. And there was a bankruptcy involved, and there was a lot of resentment, but they
Hmm.
were very, very close at one point. And so that's why I want to, that was the challenge in this scene, to try to get those two women to talk to each other.
Hmm.
So I imagine that maybe, so the scene before, they were at a fundraiser, and which happened for real. Of course, every event
Hmm.
is real. So there was a fundraiser organized to raise funds for the Notre Dame Hospital, and so they were all sitting, and then Philo happens to see her son with the daughter of Madame Lafleur, and she had forbidden her son to have anything to do with that family because
Of the
they
betrayal.
the betrayal, So then she feels it's public humiliation, and that's when she just loses it, and that's when it starts, where she wakes up after
Yep.
having been, yeah, because there was a lot happening, because for real, in those, like, she had just lost one of her daughters-in-law, Rosalba, like she lost her in February. And just before, the milk dispensary that had been going on for a few months, which had been a first trial to try to help to feed babies, had closed because of lack of funds. So that also was another a lot of emotions that she had to process. So that's why I imagine. So that's what
Mm-hmm.
I'll see with you.
Yeah.
If that made sense, that having the loss of the dispensary, so not being able to help women to take care of babies, having her daughter-in-law pass away, then being betrayed, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and seeing her son with the other family, that
Yep.
if that was, enough for her to just like lose it and
Yeah.
just be sick, that,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So a lot going on. And this is where we're going to the reconciliation. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. As I start to share my screen, first of all, I want to tell you how much I appreciate the color coding that you have used. Now, you you participated in the course we ran last fall.
Yes.
Um, Edit yourself like a dialogue doctor, and I can see um, some of the stuff we learned together in that class. So for
I took
those,
up my notes. I took up my notes and I said, it's the best because I've written a lot with the dash.
Mhm,
Doing the dash has been amazing. Also, that was in the fall, encouraging us to really write and write. And so I had not edited since then, and now I
mhm,
figured, okay, now I'm gonna submit you something which I've worked hard on it,
mhm.
and so I said, let me edit it and apply
Yep,
what you taught us, you and Jeff and JP,
yep.
So I tried to be a good student.
You absolutely were a good student. So when you sent it to me, you had physical expressions, that's any movement, in green, verbal expressions, anything that's said out loud in pink, internal reflections, things that the character thinks in yellow, and then expressions of choice in blue. Um, Now, as I was going through this, I could see that it might have felt a little bit like a struggle to you to highlight all the things because it's a lot to highlight. Um, how did you feel about this process, highlighting those elements? Were they helpful to you?
Very much so, because I did like what you said you do, is that you go one color at a time. So I
Mm-hmm,
really, really took the time to highlight first whatever and then
mm-hmm,
continuously. And it made me realize, because having the colors, it's like I realized, oh, I'm missing dialogue, or oh, I'm
mm-hmm,
missing reflection. So it became, because it's visual, I,
mm-hmm.
I could see that. I say, okay, and I added a few things,
Yep.
so I know I found it was very helpful.
Excellent. I love that. Okay. So I made you a little cheat sheet that I want to talk through here for a second. I will send this to you with my notes. And anyone who's watching this on YouTube, please feel free to screenshot this for yourselves. So you did a great job identifying the three parts of expression: physicality, vocalization, inner thought. Fantastic. What I noticed though was you had expressions of choice also highlighted. The thing about expressions of choice is they are actually for experience scenes, and the two scenes you sent me are evoke scenes. So, just as a quick reminder, experience scenes are when characters are experiencing things that are helping them grow. If you think of it like a quest, and obviously not every story is a quest, but characters gain experience, they pick up tools that they need in order to prepare them for the big climax at the end. So, in an experience scene, you are absolutely going to use all three parts of the expression, but those parts of the expression are going to be about their choices. So, in an experience scene, the character is acting. They are the ones that are in control. They're making decisions. They're taking in their surroundings. They're interacting with other people, and they are actively making decisions. And you use the physicality, the vocalization, and the inner thought to express the strength of their choices. So if somebody is making a choice but isn't really feeling very strongly about it, they might nod, but not say anything and may not think about it. As they start to grow in that strength, they may start to nod and think in their head, I can do this. And then as they get to a place where, yeah, you know what, I'm ready. I'm ready to confirm this. I will do it. They slam their fist on the desk and stand up and think, I can do this. I absolutely can. Nothing's going to stop me, right? The trio of those things express how strongly they feel about that choice. But if you're only using one, if you're only using the physicality, there's room for things to change that character's mind. So that's what you want to do in an experience scene. In an evoke scene, in a scene where the emotion is the most important part, instead of the learning, your character is going to react. And so they're not the ones in control. It's the world around them that's in control, and they are just responding to the triggers that are happening. In that case, the trio that you're using, the physicality, the vocalization, and the inner thought, that's going to convey the impact of the triggers. So you have a trigger, something happens, and then your main character reacts to it, and they're going to use vocalization and inner thought to respond to it. And then another trigger happens, and then maybe they're using vocalization and physicality to respond to it. And then another trigger happens, and maybe they're using inner thought and physicality. The difference being, when you have a really emotionally intense scene, characters don't have a lot of time to think and plan and make decisions. Think about what happens when you're emotionally charged. We don't think, we just react, right? That's what we want to bring out in an evoke scene. Whereas in an experience scene, those choices, we're going to let them have planning. We're going to let them think about things. We're going to let them weigh the options. Maybe they talk about the options, but there's a lot of autonomy. The characters are the ones who are in charge in an experience scene. In an evoke scene, we really want the emotion to come out. So what I noticed in your highlighting is that you had the physical expression, the verbal expression, and the internal reflections highlighted, but your triggers weren't highlighted, because it was as if you were thinking of these as experience scenes and you were highlighting places where your character made a decision. So, like at the end of chapter 46 or in the middle, there's a note where she says, no way, that is an expression, but it's actually in this case, because this is an emotional scene, that choice isn't really a choice. It's a verbal reaction to the fact that her husband tells her that her arch enemy is coming to see her while she's been sick. So what I did is I went through and I highlighted the triggers for you to help you see a little bit better the trigger response cycle that happens. And what we're going to do is we're going to take those triggers and we're going to find the major triggers. And I'm using that in air quotes because every trigger is important, but we're going to use the major triggers to identify what the beats of the scene are. We talk all the time in emotionally evoking scenes that we want there to be a flow to it. We want the emotions to grow and crescendo, and then we want them to relax a little bit to let both the characters and the readers breathe for a second, and then we want them to come back and hit you hard. And the flow of that is really important. So if we're looking at the beats where those main triggers are, thinking about what the response is, and where that trigger response cycle happens within a beat, we can better organize the beats and plan which beats should be bigger and which beats should be smaller. Because sometimes when we're writing, especially when we're writing in a dash, um, we get on a roll and we start writing things and we bring other characters in, and then we have, you know, a page about soup, which could be really important, but maybe in the flow of the scene, the relief that Philo feels about actually eating and filling her stomach and that relaxation might not come at the right place in the scene because that beat needs to come earlier or later. So that's what we're going to look at in the first chapter you sent me. Then in the second chapter, I'm going to scroll down because these are back-to-back evoke scenes, but the way you wrote them was very different. In the next one, you can see by the color coding that you have about 8 triggers right in a row with no responses. And then you have about 4 responses, and then about 4 triggers, and then about 4 responses, instead of going trigger, response, trigger, response, trigger, response, trigger, response. And this is where color coding becomes your best friend, because now I don't even have to read the words on the page. I can see that we've got a trigger and you're relying on, ooh, that scrolled at the wrong time. You're relying on inner thought and physicality, but there's no verbalization. And then you've got all of these other triggers, but we're not seeing any of Philo's responses until we get physicality and inner thought again. Still no verbalization. And then we get another 4 or 5 triggers, and then again, inner thought and physicality with no verbalization, right?
She was hiding. She was hiding. She
She was
wasn't ready.
hiding, right?
I want to see what you think about that because she wasn't ready.
Yep, absolutely.
Or I said it would have
Um,
been too soon for her to just answer, that's what I
yeah,
figured.
absolutely. And that's totally okay. But the question becomes, are the trigger responses giving your reader that sense of what you actually want them to feel? Or are they feeling really separated because she's monologuing and then we're having inner thought and physicality, and then she's monologuing and they're very separate? Versus if we zipper them together and we have one trigger and one response, and one trigger and one response, and one trigger and one response, the reader doesn't have time to think about either side. We're just feeling the things that are coming because they're happening so fast. We're reacting while Philo's reacting. So that's what we're going to look at today. Before we start looking at it, do
I
you
was
have any
curious to know
questions?
what you thought about that.
What
Yeah.
did you say?
I was curious to know what you would think about that.
I like the hiding. I think the hiding is really good. Um, but I want it to be more active hiding, which is weird because we want active in a reactive scene. I want it to be much more intentional about the hiding, especially because when Mrs. LaFleur comes in, the first thing she says is, really, we're going to play that game? Right? Like if somebody challenges me, I'm probably going to start talking and then slam my hand over my mouth, right? Yes, right? So then there's verbalization and physicality. And then she can say, I've apologized so much in the last few days. And then Philo can say, I know she can bury herself further under the covers, heart racing. And then I've come to see your husband every day. I've practically lost my voice. And in her mind, she can be like, I wish you'd lose your voice right now. Right? Like she doesn't necessarily have to say it in that case. She can think it, right? Or maybe she does say it, but not loud enough for Madame LaFleur to say it. And then she can say, what? Take your head out from under the cover and just tell me what you have to say. And then Philo can like pull the covers down, right? So the hiding works really well. but the hiding is very separate from the fact that her arch enemy is in her bedroom, right? Like, like I get the idea, I'm sick. I've been in this bed for 4 days. I don't want you to see me like this, right? Like the next time I see you, I want to look as good as I did at the fundraiser 5 days ago. And that's when I wanted to confront you, not in my bedroom while I'm, you know, just ate a bowl of soup. Right. Like, so that's what I wanted to do in this second part is really make it about what she's feeling in that moment is, and if like this idea to retreat, like, I don't feel well, I'm not ready for this. If that's what you want to do, then making sure that you're leaning into that, holding her breath, cocooning herself, being too hot, like, I don't want to deal with this. This is too much, but I also can't sit under this down comforter any longer, right? Like, just making it more of that reaction is kind of what I was hoping to see. So, does that make sense?
Very much so.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
But it actually starts in the scene before it
Yeah.
because the scene before it is like kind of the preparation for what's going to happen here. And you've created a chapter break in the middle of this one. It's actually one scene, but two chapters because you want to cut it off at like the reveal. But we want to think about it as one scene as it relates to the beats. So, going all the way back to the beginning, let's talk about what I mean about identifying and organizing what your beats are and how you want the emotional flow of the scene to go, knowing that you're leaning up to a confrontation and a softening of the hurt and the frustration that Philo's been feeling for years and years and years and years. Now, based off of the fact that her beloved son is basically dating the enemy or wants to date the enemy, right? Like, there's a lot of thought, there's a lot of emotion going on. And what you want your readers to do is understand the impact of all of this, not with their mind, but with their hearts, right? They've spent chapters and chapters and chapters feeling the hurt of this betrayal in this relationship. They were best friends, right? Like you say in here about the time that the first time they really bonded was after they lost a young woman in a childbirth that they couldn't save her from, right? Like, that's a big deal. All of this relationship just built on their mutual strength and their support of each other. And then to lose that, and now the possibility of it coming back, it's a lot of emotion. We just want to make sure those all get on the page.
Yes. 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 Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. So the first thing that I did as I was highlighting the triggers is I went through and identified those like major triggers. So the first one being the fact that Philo wakes up feeling poorly. Now, you as the author get to make a choice as to how you want her to respond to waking up. Is she in pain? Does she feel fear? Is she relieved? You tell us in a couple of pages that she's really not sure how long she's been sick or how bad the sickness was. That's something that I really encourage you to think about putting into your response to that. So the trigger is she wakes up feeling poorly. Is she scared? Is she confused? I actually didn't put fear or confuse, or I did put fear. I didn't put confusion in here. Let me add that. So in my notes, I put kind of where the beat of the scene can go, not necessarily relying only on what you've written here, because what you've written here, she can't open her eyes all the way. She kicks her feet out from under the blanket and she feels a little bit better because she gets the cool air. She's thirsty. Her Sophie, I guess it's one of her her
Her
support
sister-in-law.
staff. Oh, her
Sister-in-law.
sister-in-law. Okay.
Yeah.
Sophie, her sister-in-law, is there to help her, gives her some water, helps her clean up a little bit. It's very focused on the physical aspect of waking up sick, but there's no emotional component to that. Is she too tired to really think about anything? Is she just exhausted? Is she in pain? Like that's what we want to think about as we're expanding this. Now, you'll notice going back to what we learned in the course, I didn't make any changes yet. I'm just trying to identify what the flow of the scene should look like. Because if we start making changes here, if we decide, oh, we want her to be really lean into the pain part of it, and we start making changes about the pain, but then in a couple of beats, when we identify that she's confused about the fact that she's been sick for 4 or 5 days, does it make sense for her to be confused then, or does it make sense for her to be confused now? That's why we think about the beats before we start making any changes. You with me
Yep.
so far? Do you have any
Yes.
questions?
No, it's
Okay,
perfect.
great. So then the next one is she tries to get up and she's too dizzy to get up, right? This one may or may not be a major trigger depending on what you decide to do in the first one. If you decide that she wakes up feeling poorly and she's in pain and she's scared, then this feeling too dizzy is just another small trigger within that beat to raise the intensity. But if the first beat you decide is confusion and you want her to talk about, how long she's been sick, and they tell her that she's been sick for 4 days, and then she starts to be like, oh gosh, like feeling panic because she has to get back to her life and she stands up really quickly, then this dizziness creates a sense of fear, right? Because, oh gosh, maybe I'm not ready, but I have all these responsibilities, or it creates a sense of guilt, right? This is where playing with your beats and creating an order for the triggers allows you as the author to create the reader experience that you want the reader to feel. Do you want them to feel determination and then fear? Do you want them to feel confusion and then relief and then fear, right? Like you get to choose what order you put things in because you're the author. And while these people really existed, this is where the fiction part of historical fiction comes in because you probably don't have a transcript of the time that
Nope.
Philo woke up, right? Like maybe you have some anecdotes of your grandmother telling you a story, but maybe this all came from your imagination.
All came from
All
my, no, all I know is that they they were like feuding, and but I don't know how they got back together. So I figured that was 1902, and they're gonna get married 1904. Okay, that makes sense that they would start to get back together. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, it all works. But
Yeah.
you get to decide what kind of emotional story you want your reader to go through. So continuing on, you have her
So
husband
far, I
arriving.
have two beats. Like the first one would be I would lean towards confusion as the first beat.
Yeah, so this is where, Danielle, I would go through kind of all the major
Yeah.
triggers that you have and then make a decision because I also, like, you have Sophie washing her face. I didn't make that as a major trigger, but if you're deciding that Philo's independence and the fact that she's sick and she can't get out of bed by herself is challenging her independence, and that creates a frustration, then this somebody else washing her face becomes a trigger, right? One of the major triggers. And you have, let me wash your face. And Philo says, hurry up. This is getting on my nerves. Be quick. If this, I had a question for you about this. Like, she woke up after being sick for 4 days and all of a sudden she has the strength to boss people around. Is that because she's feeling vulnerable and her reaction to that vulnerability is to lash out? Is it because she's so uncomfortable that the it's getting on my nerves is like, it really hurts and I need your help? right? Like that's where the combination of the physicality, the vocalization, and the inner thoughts all come together in this trigger response cycle to help us understand what's happening. But you have to make the determination of who is Philo in this moment. If you're deciding that she's focusing on confusion in the beginning part, then her response isn't going to be hurry up. Her response is going to be, before you go, just tell me, right? Like this is important, but just tell me. And that's where deciding what your priorities are for the beats become what choices your character makes as you're going through. That's why when you read it and you're highlighting all these things, it's really important to know and understand what's there and figure out which triggers build on one emotion and which triggers, the ones I'm calling main triggers, are the ones that change the emotion. So maybe Sophie leaving the room, I'll be right back, becomes a major trigger because that makes Philo feel panicked because she's going to be left alone without being able to open her eyes. And maybe she says, no, no, don't go. And Sophie says, but we have to, like, you can't, if you keep rubbing your eyes, you're going to lose all your eyelashes, right? Like whatever it is. But that's how you're deciding where your response is fit within the realism of the scene and where it's like, this doesn't quite fit the emotionality that I was trying for.
Okay.
Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah. And
It's,
is it interesting that she had, because I was looking for something physical and I figured,
uh-huh.
maybe she's going to be really, her eyes really glued together after being that sick, you know?
Yep. And I loved it. But that question about is it interesting can't be answered by itself. It has to be answered in the context of the whole scene. If the only thing that you have in in the emotional part of the scene, it from a physical standpoint is the stickiness of the eyes, then yeah, probably, especially if it's leading to the panic or the fear or the desperation or whatever it is. But if you have her here worrying about her eyes, and then in the next page she's worrying about her hair, and then in the next page she is worried about eating, and then in the next page, and you have 7 pages in a row about the physicality that she's going through, maybe that's too much. And maybe you have to bring it back because that's going to create a fatigue for your reader. So understanding why you're putting each trigger in and how it's impacting that emotional roller coaster your reader is going through is where the important decisions are. Now, as an editor, I can give you suggestions, but you as the author have to make the decision about what are my scene beats? What do I want my reader to feel? I can give you some suggestions of what I would recommend, but you're going to have to be the one that goes, no, the physicality of her eyes being stuck together is actually really important because it symbolizes the blindness to, whatever your theme is. It's not necessarily what it is, but as an editor, I might not always know that. But knowing all of these trigger response, trigger response, trigger responses, because we've all read, allows us to understand the impact on both the character and the reader better. We've all read that scene where it starts out really, really emotionally intense, and then it just stays at the same emotional intensity for like 5 pages. And then all of a sudden we're like, wait, am I still sad? I feel like I'm supposed to still be sad, but the emotion hasn't changed. So we get distracted from it because we're used to the ebb and the flow. That's what you're doing here is you're crafting it. So I might not have picked the right high point triggers. You might pick different ones, but my goal here was just to give you examples of how I think about it when I'm organizing.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yes, yes, very
Okay,
much.
let's go through a couple of more. So her husband arrives. How does she feel when her husband arrives? Is she relieved that he's there? Is she confused because he never comes to see her when she's sick? Is she embarrassed because, usually her husband only sees her when she's pressed and perfect? What is it that she's feeling? Helping us understand. So what all we get when we see this trigger is she turned toward the door. Because that physicality isn't paired with anything emotional or anything verbal, we don't know how we're supposed to feel. Does she turn toward the door and say, "Don't come in here," which might show embarrassment, or she might say, "What are you doing here?" which shows confusion. Or maybe she turns towards the door and she thinks to herself, when was the last time he came into my room? He's supposed to be in his room. I don't know, what do they share a room? Lots of times in the early 1800s they don't. So I don't know. Or it's her room and he never comes. I don't know. Whatever it is. Like that's where pairing the physicality and the internal or the verbal, the balance of more than one really helps us to understand kind of how she's feeling. And then this is where we start to hear a little bit about the fact that she's still feeling quite confused. He says you gave us quite a scare. And again, this is where, if you're going for confusion, these things work really well. You gave us quite the scare. She's trying to think, and her brain can't think clearly. You initially had this marked as a physicality because it's about the brain or an inner thought. But the fact that her brain is preventing her from thinking clearly is actually a trigger. How do we feel when we can't remember something? Do we start to feel desperate? Do we feel more confused? Do we feel embarrassed? And that's where this main trigger becomes important. This trigger is changing the game. Maybe back here we were feeling, and I won't scroll back to it, but maybe in the last beat you decided that she was feeling really determined. And despite the fact that she was feeling dizzy, she's going to get herself up and she's going to get out of bed. Then her husband shows up and now she's really confused. Maybe I'm sicker than I thought I was. This is how you're going to pick and choose how you want the scene to ebb and flow. Let me just do the last couple because they become kind of important as you leaned into the next part when her enemy shows up. So now she's told that she was sick enough to see a doctor, but she doesn't really remember. Again, this is where the confusion comes in that realism. If she's waking up after being so sick, but she doesn't remember, maybe that confusion and that conversation about how long have I been sick, what day is it, needs to come earlier. She doesn't wait for her husband to show up to ask the questions about, wait a minute, what did the doctor say? I've been really ill. What are you talking about? Maybe she has that conversation with Sophie right up front.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was thinking, yeah.
Yeah. Um, and then here you have her flashing back to the party, which is what happened that got her sick. And then just as a side note, um, it was never really clear to me if she was physically sick or if this emotional response that she has to seeing her son with the daughter of her enemy is what actually made her sick and she became physically sick because of the emotional sickness. That doesn't actually really come out in the story, but that's something that you'll want to decide and make sure, unless you've already covered it in the scene before, in which case then you don't need to cover it here. But if she's remembering this is a new beat, right? If she's remembering seeing her son standing with the enemy, how does she feel about that? Does it make her angry? Does it make her sad? Does it make her have more questions? Just kind of keeping going. And then her husband tells her, "I got something to tell you." And she's like, "What?" And he gives her just a little piece of information. And then she needs to ask again, like, what's happening? And this is where the curiosity, the fear, the annoyance, or maybe she's just exhausted, right? She just had to have the stickiness wiped out of her eyes. She's hungry. She tried to sit up. She had to lay back down. Now she has to talk to her husband. Somebody else had to bring her water. And now he's like, oh, but by the way, I got to tell you something. And she's like, oh my gosh, can this just wait? Right? Like thinking about what you want your reader to feel in the ebb and the flow, because a lot of times especially when we're building up to something, we think that every single beat has to escalate the emotion. But sometimes we just need a little bit of relief. So having her feel annoyance at him or just exhaustion and is just like, can we just stop playing this game and can you just tell me what you want to tell me? You clearly feel like you made a mistake. Just tell me already, right? Like very different than the curiosity that you have her showing right now, which is like, was there a problem? Who? Who? And then she figures out who it is by herself. When she figures out who it is by herself, what does that do for her? Does it send her into a rage? Or is this the moment that she's been waiting for? I want to rekindle this friendship. I want to mend bridges, but I couldn't reach out. So Mrs. LaFleur coming to her creates a sense of hopefulness or a possibility of forgiveness. And again, as an editor, I can tell you all the possibilities that are there, but you as the author have to make the decision. What do you want her to feel in these moments? Maybe she has a sense of hope, but it's fleeting and then it turns directly into rage, right? Like this moment of Mrs. LaFleur came to see me and her husband's like, yeah, yeah. And I told her that she could come back when she said she wanted to when you're feeling better. And then it's like, you did what? You made my choices for me, right? Like all of those things you can pick and choose how you want the emotion. But you'll notice by thinking really strategically about what you already have on the page and what places do you want to dial up the emotion and what places do you want to dial back the emotion, you get to choose how quickly this scene comes through because all of this is leading up to Mrs. LaFleur actually walking into her bedroom, right? But we're now on page 4, and we're no closer to that actual reconciliation that you want to have. But now we've introduced the idea that Mrs. LaFleur has been in my house, right?
In my bedroom.
Right, right. She's been in my bedroom while I was passed out. I didn't even know what was happening for 4 days. And here this woman, my arch enemy, shows up in my bedroom, convincing my husband that it's okay for her to be here, right? Not knowing, we as the reader don't know, you as the author know, that in 3 pages she's going to show up in the bedroom again. But how you decide that Philo is going to respond to that news, is she going to get angrier and angrier and angrier until her husband says, and our son pleaded on her behalf? If she's outraged, what happens then? Is she shocked? Does she feel betrayed? Is she confused? It, wait, he took her side? What is it that she feels there, right? Again, figuring out what do you want your reader to feel, you make Philo feel those things. But notice how we're looking at each beat individually. What's the big trigger? And then we want to keep the 5 or 6 exchanges, trigger response cycles before we change it again, because we can't change it. New beat, new beat, new beat, new beat, new beat. That's exhausting. But we also don't want a beat to last 4 pages because that's fatiguing. So finding the right balance of escalation before we make the change becomes really important. Now, we're getting to a place where you asked the question earlier about the physicality of the eyes. Is it boring? And I said, I don't think it is. I think it's important, especially because it can create the sense of fear. But one thing that I noticed is, and I mentioned that it depends on how many of these things you have, you create an interruption in this conversation that they have where somebody knocks on the door and brings her food. That interruption can be a really important moment of relief, right? You know how sometimes when you're so mad at somebody and you can't do anything about it and you don't know what to do, and then the phone rings or something happens and you have this moment of interruption and then there's just this flood of relief. Two sharp knocks come to the door, but we don't see Philo do anything until after Irene announces that she brought her something to eat. If you have the two sharp knocks on the door and Philo's like, oh, thank goodness I don't have to talk about this anymore. Or maybe it's, oh my gosh, is she here right now? And it creates a new sense of fear. If you have Philo say that in the moment, you're telling the reader what they need to feel instead of them having to figure it out as they go a couple of pages or a couple of more exchanges later. So if you decide that you want this to really be relief, then having this conversation about food and the chicken soup and the doctor saying that it's important, that you really want to lean into that. And Philo's like, oh, I'm so hungry. Thank you so much, Irene. And her husband is like, but we're not done. And she's like, oh, we're done. I'm eating. Right. And her husband's like, but you know, she's going to be here any moment. And Philo can be like, oh, this smells delicious. Is this your chicken soup? And Irene can be like, yeah, the doctor said, right? Like looking back and forth between her two bosses and who should she be talking to, right? Maybe the husband saying, not now, Irene, not now. And Philo's like, yes, yes, come in and bring me the soup. That's where you can take something that as you were writing felt really important to you. There was a need to have this chicken soup brought in here, but why? What was it about this bowl of chicken soup in this moment that became so important to you? Is it because Philo's like, you can talk all you want, but you know what you did. So just get out of here. I will deal with you later because I just have to finish healing. Or is this like everybody's taking care of her because she isn't taking care of herself? Is she mad because the chicken soup interrupted her? Like, what is the purpose of why this beat is in this scene? That's really what you want to think about as, again, I've said it, I think, 15 times. Anyone who's playing a drinking game along with us, how you want to craft the reader experience.
Also, because after when there's again the knock, she thinks it's Irene,
Yes,
and that's why,
yes.
yeah.
And that, that becomes an important thing as well, right? Like, so knowing what you want to do, how much do we need to talk about it? How quickly do we need to talk about it, right? The fact that all the way down here, this is when the doctor said, so we made your favorite broth, but they've already talked about up here, it's a bowl of chicken soup and the aroma of the broth. Like if Irene comes in and she's like, so Sophie told me that you were feeling better. Here's the soup that I made for you, right? Letting her talk earlier. Maybe she doesn't talk until Philo speaks to her. I don't know. You know the background of the relationships, but that's what you want to do is think about why did you bring the soup up now? Is it just because you needed the knock and another knock? If so, then this beat doesn't have to be quite as long as it is. She can just come in and her husband can be like, we'll talk about this later. And Philo can go, she has this moment to breathe. And then he's like, we'll talk about it later. And that enrages her again. Or maybe it's like, yeah, whatever. I don't even care. But the one thing that I will highlight for you, I should have highlighted it for you earlier, but I didn't. I'm going to put it here. Someone is in the living room. Ooh, I can't type. So, Irene says this, but nobody responds to it. Is it so if feel if my husband has been telling me that my arch enemy has been in my house and the maid tells me that someone's in the living room, you better believe that I'm asking 100 questions. Who is it? How long have they been here? Who are they here to see? Are they here to see me or are they here to see him? Is it right? Like I'm going to want to know because I'm either preparing for battle or I'm preparing to tuck in and eat this delicious bowl of soup, right? So making sure, and this is again where color coding becomes such an important thing because you can see the trigger of the bowl of soup, the trigger of someone in the living room, the trigger of Daniel, Jerome saying, we'll talk about this later. Philo only responds to her husband saying, we'll talk about this later. She doesn't respond to the maid bringing the soup. She doesn't respond to the fact that somebody's in the living room. And that's where the trigger response cycle. When you have such an emotionally filled scene, every trigger is going to need a response. So,
Yeah, and that's what I'm now I understand. So all those um, expression of or of the emotion
mhm.
um, is through dialogue.
That's where the three elements, I'm going to move this back over. Every response that you have, you're conveying the impact of the trigger. You're going to use some combination of physicality, vocalization, and inner thought. So, yes, it can be dialogue, but traditionally we think of dialogue being some combination of the physicality, vocalization, and inner thought. But you don't necessarily need her to say something every time there's a trigger, especially like in the scene where she's hiding from her frenemy. Um, as she's hiding, you said you don't want her to talk. So there's going to be a lot of physicality and there's going to be a lot of inner thought without a lot of vocalization. But what we want to be careful about is just picking one as the response to a trigger, because if we're only using one, it can be really confusing to know what that reaction is. If we go back up here to where her husband, she hears her husband coming up the stairs. Where is it? Whoa, that was way far back up here. She heard him coming up the stairs. She turns her head toward the door. That's only physicality. We don't know what she's thinking because she doesn't say anything and she doesn't think anything. So putting two things together is typically better for the reader to understand how she's feeling in the moment. But sometimes if we're just thinking something, the intensity of the thought isn't expressed without the physicality. And again, what we say sometimes can be misconstrued. So putting the physical with it or the inner thought with it can balance it. That's why we try to use two out of three of them in this context.
Okay.
So it doesn't always have to be that way, and you want to try to stay away from a pattern of always using the same two. Try to mix them up, but in general, putting a balance in there, like you did a great job here of maybe put a vocalization with that, come in or go away. And then here she's got the verbalization and the body language, and here she has the verbalization and the inner thought. Again, that's really good balance in that it's not the same thing every time. Just
But
keeps
what
it
I'm
fresh.
thinking is I did not identify all the triggers, and that's why
Yep,
I'm not reacting
yep,
enough.
yep,
Okay.
yep. Or your reactions are there, right? Like in here, you have reactions. So the trigger is she hears him. Her reaction is she turns toward the door. He shows up. They told me you were feeling better. You gave us quite a scare. Her reaction is, what do you mean? Looking back and forth between Sophie and her husband. He says you've been really ill. She says that bad, but then she can't remember. But notice there's no escalation of the emotion. They could be talking about she was late for dinner, right? Um, they told me that you were going to be a few minutes late. You gave me quite a scare. What do you mean? She looks back and forth between them. Your I guess they didn't have a car then. Your carriage, your horse was lame when it got back. Oh, was it really bad? She was thinking to herself versus how ill or, you know, I didn't mean or you gave us quite a scare. I didn't mean to scare you. Why were you so afraid? Right? Like thinking about what is really going to convey the emotion. What are you going for versus just writing dialogue to have the back and forth of the moment. If you want your reader to feel confusion, what do you mean? I don't feel ill now. Challenging they said you've been really ill. Well, I feel fine now. I mean, it's only, or maybe it's, I've only been asleep for a couple of hours. No, dear, you've been asleep for 4 days. 4 days? That's confusion and panic, right? Like thinking about what you want the emotion to be. If it's embarrassment, you gave us quite a scare. Oh, I'm so sorry. I will get up and I'll get back to my duties now. No, no, I don't want you I'm not saying that. It's just, I was worried that you were so sick. Oh, I'm so sorry. I promise I'm feeling better now. You don't have to, I don't want you to worry. You don't have to worry. Much more embarrassment. So that's where the beats that you're deciding in your response come into play. If you want it to be, in this case, she's minimizing, oh, you don't have to worry, right? Like you gave us quite a scare. Why? I'm fine, right? Maybe she's gaslighting him a little bit. I'm fine. They said you were really ill. Oh, no, it's not that bad, right? Those things matter as you're crafting the experience. Where this becomes really, really important is this scene in and of itself, or this part of the scene in and of itself, is important because it's setting the stage. But what you're really trying to get to is the reconciliation, right? After she eats her bowl of soup and everyone leaves her alone and she goes back to sleep and she's starting to get comfortable and then there's a knock on the door and again, right, like the triggers here, um they start to get further apart, which is okay if you want it to be she's feeling calm, she's feeling relaxed, she's ready to like go take a nap. And now she's feeling all the excitement of three people being in and out of her bedroom in the last 20 minutes when she's been asleep for 4 days. She's starting to go to sleep and she hears the knock on the door. And if she hears the knock on the door, instead of saying to Irene, you've forgotten something, right? Maybe she says, the bowl is fine, come back and get it later, right? It doesn't have to be this understanding of who she expects it to be. It can be something different. And then she hears, may I come in? She recognizes Mrs. LaFleur's voice. And what is that? What is that going to be? Is she going to be angry? Is she going to be afraid? Is she going to be hopeful? Is she going to be embarrassed? Thinking about where this leads is what you want to do as you're putting these together, deciding when she's going to be angry, when she's going to be hopeful, when she's going to be embarrassed. Because if she's angry up here, maybe she shouldn't be angry here again. Maybe she should be embarrassed. Maybe if she's confused earlier, this is where you want the anger to come in. And not that you can't have anger in two places, but you want to make sure that it feels different, either bigger or put in a different place. Am I focusing on her? Am I focusing on me? Am I mad at my husband for letting this woman up here when he just saw me 5 minutes ago and I look a mess? And the reason I'm hiding is less about not wanting to see her and more about the embarrassment that my hair is a mess and I smell like I've been sleeping in my bed for 4 days, right? Like figuring out what that is so that when she starts to bury herself, right? Instinctively, Philo curls into herself like a snail retreating into its shell at the approach of danger. This makes me feel like this is about fear. She's afraid of this woman. So she buries herself under the covers with her heart racing. But is she afraid or is she angry? Right? But she goes on to say this was stupid, really stupid. By retreating like that, it's as if she has something to hide. She'd just given the woman the advantage. So is she afraid of her? Or is she like, what is she thinking by giving her all of this just based off of Mrs. LaFleur coming in? We get a lot, but we don't know what she's doing. Versus, may I come in? Instinctively, Philo curls inside of herself like a snail retreating into its shell at the approaching danger, right? So now we have some fear. Then we hear Mrs. LaFleur's heels click on the wooden floor as she came to rest at the height of the bed. This was really stupid. By retreating like this, as if she had something to hide, she'd just given the woman the advantage. Really? You're going to play this game? I just, she covers her mouth. How is this going? How am I going to get out of this without losing face? Right. And then she can say, I've been here every day and I'm here to apologize. And then Philo can think, you better apologize. This is all your fault. And then she can say, if you want me to get down on my knees, I'll do it. And then Philo can think to herself, well, what's good is that going to do? I don't need you to get on your knees. I need you to make it right. Whatever it is, like letting them have that back and forth, we get to see more of what Philo is actually thinking as Mrs. LaFleur is explaining herself. Because what's happening right now is because there are no beats, the change in Philo's emotion from I'm angry at her and then I'm being stifled underneath this blanket to now I am Mrs. LaFleur hands her a handkerchief at one point so she can wipe her nose and her face, right? And in that moment, that handkerchief is what changes Philo's mind that maybe there's hope here. But we have 2.5 pages, well, 1.5 pages of like, I can't talk to her. I don't want to talk to her. I'm mad at her. And then all of a sudden, a handkerchief is what makes the switch. We don't have that like thinking about um, what Mrs. LaFleur is saying and how that's affecting Philo, right? I was so afraid of losing you, my dear, Mrs. LaFleur continued. Maybe that's when Philo speaks up or peeks her head out from under the blanket a little bit and is like, I was afraid of losing you too. And then she covers her face back up, right? And then your temperature was so, or wait a minute, or maybe she says, what do you mean losing me? You lost me years ago. And Mrs. LaFleur was like, your temperature was so high, I couldn't leave you alone. And then she's like, other people were here. I was fine. And she covers her head back up, right? Or she thinks about peeking out and saying, other people were here. Why did you? Right. But by understanding how Philo is processing what Mrs. LaFleur is saying, when she hands her that handkerchief, it's not just a handkerchief, it's a symbol of Mrs. LaFleur being like, I'm not going away. I see, I know you've been asleep for 4 days, but I watched that and this feud has to end. And then maybe Philo sits up and is like, well, you had time, you had 4 days to process your feelings, but I'm still angry. And then Mrs. LaFleur can be like, I understand that you're angry. We've been angry with each other for a long time. And Philo can be like, and you made your daughter woo my son. I don't know, whatever. Like, not just the old wounds, but now there are new wounds too. And then Mrs. LaFleur can be like, yes, at first I didn't want them to be involved either, right? And she can be like, of course we don't. We're enemies. I don't know. You're a writer. You'll figure out a better way to say this. But by picking out the beats of like, How long is Philo going to stay angry at this woman in the scene? When is her heart going to start to soften? And when is Mrs. LaFleur going to put her foot in her mouth and saying, I'm sorry to say it, but your son isn't particularly hardworking, right? And then she continues, my daughter defends him, saying that he has an artistic temperament, but sometimes I think he's just lazy, right? If somebody says my son isn't particularly hardworking, I'm going to say, wait a minute, right? Like, we were just about to build a bridge, and now you're going to say something bad about my son, and then she's going to keep going. My daughter defends him, and Philo can be like, I like your daughter more than I like you. And then she can be like, I know he has an artistic temperament, but I just think he's lazy. And instead of Philo saying you're exaggerating, she can be like, lazy? Well, I'll tell you who's lazy or whatever, right? Like thinking about what are the moments that are going to bring back all the years of hurt. What are the places where, and then she says, and then I love this. Mrs. LaFleur is baiting her, right? I just needed a reaction out of you, right? Like we're building a bridge and now you're going to throw this fuel on the fire, right? And then how's Philo going to respond to that? Thinking about all of these moments and how they come together so that when you get to the end, because this isn't the end of it, right? They reconcile and then they're focusing on what comes next, which is the hope of us working together, we can get back the support for the community that we've been working on. That becomes a really big part of what's happening next. But again, you need them to come together in a way that feels really realistic because it's right now they're talking about each other. Well, she's talking about this woman as if she's an enemy, but Mrs. LaFleur has had a change of heart and has been there the whole time. At some point, Philo needs to acknowledge the fact that her friend, like she misses her friend, and it's not just about the anger, it's about the hurt. And that's by going through and identifying what the big trigger is and how you want the response in the same way we did above. It was easier in the section above because the triggers were balanced with Philo's reactions. Here you have lots of triggers and lots of reactions and lots of triggers and lots of reactions where you want to balance them out.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the next step is after you've figured out where all of the main triggers are, is to plan for your beats. So if here you decide that Philo waking up, you really want to lean into the confusion, then what you want to do is you want to figure out what she's going to say when she's confused. And here I'll send you this too, but I gave you an example. So right now you have a paragraph of physicality and inner thought. Philo's mouth was dry. She tried to open her eyes, but her eyelashes were fused together. It was daylight. If she believed the beams of light that filtered through every time she blinked, she must be in bed, feeling the edge of the wool blanket that covered her chest. She kicked out her feet to the open air. It felt better with the draft of fresh air cooling them down. You're awake, Sophie said, touching her forehead, and your fever's gone. I'm thirsty, Philo's voice was hoarse. Since when was she lying down, right? If we take that and we turn it around and use a trigger response, Philo tried to open her eyes, but her eyelashes were fused together. Oh, her voice was hoarse. She blinked and blinked again. Light began to filter through. Is it morning? Could she believe the beams? You're awake, Sophie said, touching her forehead. If you're using the trigger response, highlighting the elements that are happening to her, and then balancing that out with her reaction, you're letting us as the reader feel moment by moment what Philo is feeling, allowing us to really lean into that confusion, right? Like, and again, I took a ton of editorial liberties here based off of what you had written, but like, this is it morning, right? Like, if I can't see and I'm seeing light streaming in and I'm not used to electricity where I can just flip the light switch on, right? Like, oh, there's light. It must be morning, right? Because as far as we know, she just remembers being at the ball last night. She doesn't really remember that she's been asleep for 4 days.
Yeah.
So then Sophie can say, "You're awake," and touches her forehead. And then she can say, "Sophie, what are you doing here?" Right? Instead of right now, she goes right to the physical. "I'm thirsty." And Sophie says, "Your fever's gone. I can help you get a drink." And then she swallows a bunch of gulps, and she's still trying to loosen her eyelids, right? We're not feeling what she's feeling. We're learning about her physical experience. But if we break it down and use trigger, response, we get more of the feeling moment by moment. It allows you to really lean into the confusion of this beat. It also means that you can take the conversation from after her husband shows up, kind of telling her, "You were very ill. How long? 4 days and 4 nights." My sweet Jesus, she frowns. "That's a long time. What happened?" Right? Instead of what had happened being in her inner thought, she can just vocalize that. And Sophie can say, "You fainted at the end of the competition." And she can be like, "I fainted? What do you mean? No, that I never faint," right? Letting her lean into that confusion, we as the reader feel confusion, and then her stomach rumbles and she starts to feel hungry, and Sophie's like, "Let me get a washcloth for you and tell Irene to bring you some soup." And she can be like, "Okay, but why are you here?" And she can be like, "We've all taken turns, but let me go get something." And she leaves the room, and that's when Philo can have this moment of, okay, so trying to think back to the competition, or excuse me, to the event, and she's there and she tries to remember the night and working backward, and she remembers putting on the dress. She looks around the room and she sees the dress and she's like, "I remember wearing that, but I don't remember taking it off. I was wearing it. I was standing next to the buffet table," or whatever she was doing, right? And she can have this moment while she's alone in her room, and then she feels the hot flash, and then her husband can show up, right? So you're still taking all the elements that you worked so hard to write, but you're picking and choosing the order you want them to show up. So the reader has an experience. There's confusion, and then there's relief from the confusion. And then she has a moment of downtime by herself where she's working some things out, which actually works her back up to the place of, "Oh, my son is with that girl whose mother was so, aren't doesn't he know they shouldn't be trusted?" And then her husband bursts in and is like, "Oh, thank goodness. I'm so glad to see you." And she's like, maybe she starts asking him more questions. You have this great line of, she had a million questions, but she didn't know where to start. If I have a million questions, I'm just going to start spouting them out. How long, what did I say? What did you tell people? How did you get me home? What is Sophie doing here? And her husband can be like, "Relax, relax. Everyone's been here." And she can be like, "Everyone who?" And he can be like, "Well, this person and this person." And maybe he like tries to slip Madame LaFleur in between like five different people. And she can be like, kind of thinking in her head as he's rattling them off. And he's like, "Wait a minute, Mrs. LaFleur was here? What are you talking about?" Right? Like, that's where you get to decide, where is she going to be the most angry? Where is she going to start relaxing? What are the parts that are important, right? Like, so if she starts as confused and then she has this moment of revelation in solitude by herself, and then her husband comes in and she starts to get angry and worked up at him, and then Irene shows up with the bowl of soup and they have this conversation about soup, and it relaxes her again, and she's like, "It's fine. The woman's gone. She's not coming back. I know he told her to come back." And maybe she shouts to her husband, "Don't let that woman come into my bedroom again," right? And she finishes her bowl of soup and she's all relaxed. And then there's a knock at the door and she tells Irene to come back later. And then the door just opens up and here's this woman. Now you have a huge roller coaster of emotion that is really intentionally identified for how you want the reader to experience this, all based off of this really great moments that you put in here of what are the things they're going to talk about? What are the things that felt natural when you were writing it? That's the difference between writing and editing is when you're writing, you just want to put all of the things on the page. When you're editing, you can really craft the experience.
Okay.
So,
Yep. So I have some work to do.
the good news is once you figure out the beats, because you have so much written, it becomes a lot easier because you can see, I want this to be fear. I want this to be confusion. Everything in that beat focuses on how does she feel? How does she express the confusion? When you see, oh, I don't have a good balance. This isn't a good example because this is great balance right here. In a section where there's not great balance, right? This is two verbalizations and no physicality. You can lean into that by going, oh, this should be anger. Doctor's orders, you let the doctor come in here to see me, or where, how did you pay for the doctor, or whatever, right? Like whatever it is that allows you to expand on the things that you already have based off of the emotions you're trying to convey. What
Yeah,
questions?
it's a craft. It's a like I feel like I'm starting to understand the balance, and I've been very focused on mixing. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the conversation, the physicality, and the thinking. But I
Yep.
guess it's still very rational.
Yes. Yes.
So now I'll have to edit with now thinking more in terms of emotions after that. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I love what you just said there about the rationality. You want an experience scene to be very rational, right? When the character is in control and they are acting and they are expressing their choices using physicality, vocalization, and inner thought, it should be very rational, very understandable. Every choice the character makes, we should understand. In an evoke scene, we want to feel every inner thought, every expression, every physicality. We just want to be in the moment, moment by moment by moment. Yes, when we step back, we want to be like, yeah, I totally get that's how I would feel in that moment. But you don't want your reader thinking in an evoke scene. You want your reader feeling in an evoke scene. They can think and they can understand and they can be like, yeah, I'd make that choice too because of these situations and this and my background and all of that. Experiences are much more rational. Emotions are much more guttural. Just reaction, 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 reaction. And that's where I think you are absolutely right in what you have here is this is great balance, but in the balancing, you've lost the rawness of the emotion. What
Yeah.
does she say when she's feeling emotional here? If she was angry, how does that look different than if she was thinking rationally, right? And there are going to be times where someone is feeling something and their outward presentation is going to be really rational, but their inner thoughts can be chaotic. And you can again play around with that in there. I do think that part of what you were going for here, especially based off of the fact that you were focusing on expressions of choice here, is that you were leaning in these scenes much more toward experience where there's a decision, right? Like she's deciding to forgive her friend versus I can't help but be persuaded by the fact that my ex-friend spent 4 days by my bedside. That's not a rational thing. That's a, oh, you were here? Oh, I was that sick. Oh, right. Like I can't help but everything that you're saying, you don't like them together either. Yeah, okay, great. That gives us common ground, right? Like I didn't think I would ever agree with you on anything ever again, right? Like those things become they you as the author are planning them, but they should feel very unplanned to the reader because the main character is not in control. They're reacting to things. So I love what you said about it feels very rational. So,
Yep. Yeah, yeah, it's a process, you know. It's
mhm,
like I feel like I've learned so much more, you know. It's like
mhm.
an opening, it's like by layers. Yeah.
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
And you'll likely find that some scenes are going to feel much more like the emotion is going to make much more sense and is going to come out on the page a lot easier. I think one of the reasons after your chapter break that you wrote so much more of like, these are all the things she did and these are all the things that Philo did, is that you were really focusing on Philo's emotion in this point, but then you kind of gave her pause and then you were like, okay, after Philo feels like this, what's Mrs. LaFleur going to do? And then you wrote all of that instead of going, okay, she's feeling this way. Give me a little bit of this, give me a little bit of this, right? This feels like it flowed much more emotionally for you than the earlier part. The earlier part felt much more, and I think maybe that's why the two look as different as they do. But again, I'm just the editor. I just tell you what I see and what your options are, and then you do the magic of putting it all together.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
No, you have a knack of, you know, like infusing emotion. And now I see it, you know, and then it's going to be easier to just like playing around. Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
Yes.
All
Yes.
right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and turn the recording off, and we can talk for a few more minutes.